Hello, welcome to the American Revolution. This is episode 5, Common Sense. We're going to start with the timeline here, the establishment of the Navy, go through a couple battles, and then probably fill up the rest of the time with Thomas Paine and the first book he wrote, right?
Well, we'll get to that at the end. I don't know how much time we're going to have at the end, but yeah, we're going to talk about Thomas Paine in the first pamphlet, the series of pamphlets, and the effect of the pamphlets and so forth, on the conduct of the war and so on.
Yeah, we'll get more into a little bit of his background too. I'll pull up his biography because he was a recent immigrant actually to the colonies before the war. So we'll save that.
Yes and no. He wasn't really. Well, we'll talk about that because it is an interesting time frame. It's something that's quite interesting, and it actually does play later on into American politics. All right, because of who these people were, and where they came from. But let's get started. All right, we started once again. We will reiterate. All right, the United States Navy is established on October 13th. All right, the Army had been established earlier. Now you have the establishment of the Navy. All right, now what are they going to do for a Navy? Well, let's be honest. All right, for the most part, they just basically handed out letters of marque initially to take on the British. Now, the American shipbuilding is quite a bit different, all right, than the shipbuilding that's going on in Great Britain. All right, now Great Britain is using, believe it or not, American lumber, all right, to build some of their bigger ships. All right, this is something that's actually an issue, okay, because of the nice tall trees that are available. You got nice long beams of wood that can be transported dry to Great Britain for masts and so forth. This is the age of the sailing ship.
Yeah, but they continue to harvest up in the Canadian territories. So
yes. No, I'm not saying that it blocks it or anything, but you got to remember the American ports, the largest ports on the American continent, right, are Boston and New York. Okay, so yeah, you have other ports you can get these things from, but it does impede it considerably. But the other thing about this though is the American ships we don't have the resources. The American colonies do not have the resources of Great Britain. Specifically, what's going to become, obviously the age of the Industrial Revolution. We don't have iron. We don't have a lot of our own native iron. Iron deposits are not well established at this point, nor are coal deposits well established at this point. All right, all these things will come to the fore later on, but at this point in time, industry in America is nowhere near what it is in Great Britain. And when they start talking about Britain at this point in time, the British have not. They've not gotten serious about hammering the colonies. This is something people have to understand. The ships that they're sending, the British Navy that they've sent so far is fairly small. It really doesn't include the big ships of the line. The ships, they're already sailing at this point. Ships with 90 to 100 guns on them. And the British have a lot of them. Okay? They're nowhere near the colonies. They're nowhere near bothering anything right now. So the might of the British has yet to be unleashed. Okay, now the reason I go so much into that is because it goes into the first things, the first few things that we're going to talk about. Right. First of all is the siege of 96. All right, also known as the Savage Old Fields battle. What happens here is the British military is in the southern colonies trying to prevent what happened in the north. Specifically, they're trying to seize the powder, magazines, and lead. Okay, if there's a powder magazine, if there's munitions around, they want to seize it. They want to seize these stores, right, so that they can't be used. All right. The problem with doing this actually is kind of interesting in that much of this is powder and shot that's actually meant as trade items to the Indians, to the Native Americans, right, to the various Native American tribes. The Native American tribes have made deals for these guns and then the powder and the ammunition. And the British authorities are basically seizing these stores, all right, even though they're technically meant for the Native American tribes. Now, why are they doing this? Right. Well, the main reason they're doing it, quite frankly, is that they don't want friendly relations between the colonists and the Native Americans. And there's two reasons for this. One reason that they're very upset about it is the fact that there's been an edict that the colonists don't move westward. Well, if the tribes are okay with it, there's nothing to prevent them from going westward, right? So the British authorities are kind of playing a double-handed kind of game here, right? Now, in this first battle, what happens is guy comes back. Hello, Red Monarch. The guy in charge of the British forces in South Carolina decides that he is going to seize, I think it's Drummond, to seize this powder and this lead. All right. The colonists, of course, raise a force, raise a siege of this guy, right, and basically force him to force him out. All right. So they are forced out of. The loyalists are basically forced out of South Carolina and completely. It's temporarily. It's only temporary, but a major force of loyalists. And that's the other thing to remember is a lot of these forces that are on the British side are the loyalist forces. At this point in time, the forces that are being raised by the colonists, all right, the patriots, are actually larger than overall. But that's just because it's going to change later on, but there are reasons for all of this at the time. And this begins, now this first battle is more or less minor, right? It's not really a battle. Okay. Meanwhile, up north, Ethan Allen, right? His Green Mountain Boys, they marched to take Montreal, all right? And they basically lay siege to the fort. The fort surrenders without a shot. Then later on, they try to move over, and Ethan Allen is captured. All right, and for 2 years of the war, he sits out for the next couple of years of the war. Right, well, the next year or so. He's released.
Well, he's kind of lucky, actually, because even before the revolution, he was already having border skirmishes with what was it in the northeastern area of New York? They were fighting or something like that.
Yeah, Ethan Allen is he is a hard drinking, hard fighting, just someone that's full, what you consider someone who goes, okay, boy, he's like the biker of the Revolutionary War, right? I mean,
well, yeah, but I mean, he's lucky because unlike somebody like Washington, where if they captured Washington, yeah, they would have hung him. But they would have done it a little bit differently. Like Ethan Allen's lucky they didn't just string his ass up, right? I mean,
well, there were a lot of people calling for that. And the only reason he wasn't strong was they were worried about him being used as a martyr. Hey, Memes, how's it going, man? So worrying about Ethan Allen becoming a martyr is a big thing because he is the first. He's considered the first hero. He's the one who captured Fort Ticonderoga. All right. Now he did it with other forces and in the with Benedict Arnold, who people forget about. All right. Although Benedict Arnold didn't forget the slight. All right. But he did capture it. So he's well known as as a colonial. He's one of the sons of liberty that people are pointing to. He is one of the heroes. So hanging one of their heroes, all right, there was people were worried. Okay, what is that going to do? Not so much in the areas like Boston and the big cities, but what's it going to do for the rural populations that are out there? Because he is an absolute hero to these guys. You can't understate this or overstate it.
Yeah, but I have nothing against Ethan Allen, but the thing is, him not recognizing Benedict Arnold for his part in taking Fort Ticonderoga really was the first step towards Benedict Arnold turning on the American cause. West Point could still be Fort Benedict today.
Yeah, it could be. It definitely could be. And yes, memes. It is the one. Ethan Allen was named for Ethan Allen. Yeah, the Patriot. So this then opens the way for the Quebec campaign, all right, in the north, all right. Next, you have a very important battle, right? It's the Battle of the Great Bridge. Right? Now, why is this important? It's important only because here's where it took place, right? It's important.
Just forget about all the highways, guys.
Obviously, this is what they're talking about. Oh no, I'm sorry. That's going to be the next battle. I'm sorry. This battle here, though, the Great Bridge Battle, is important because the governor orders, all right, the Patriots to be put down in Virginia. He starts to march once again to try and seize powder and weapon stores that are once again slated for Native American tribes, for trade with the Native Americans. Okay. On the way, the forces begin to gather, and he gets a number of loyalists to initially gather behind him, but they don't last long. They start fading away after a while, and the Patriot cause begins to bloom. And at the Great Bridge, both sides know that they've got to cross this bridge, right? And they start bringing some real forces here. They start bringing up cannon, okay? The Loyalists open up in an attempt to try and force the bridge with British streaming across. The Americans quickly rally their forces and absolutely devastate everyone on the bridge. The British charge again. A couple kind of get to the lines but are quickly dispatched as another bloody massacre happens on that bridge. And the British are decimated. Now, this is only 1,200, 1,500 troops on either side. However, what this causes is Durham to flee. He is the governor of Virginia. All right, he runs, and they actually flee and flee all of Virginia. All of Virginia now is in the hand of the Patriots at this point. So you no longer have British government here, and this is important to understand that during these early battles, the colonists were establishing, okay, we don't need the British government. Not only don't we need it, it doesn't exist anymore. The concept goes for a year of, okay, we can handle this ourselves. We don't need the British. We don't need Great Britain. We don't need the mothership. Okay, we're fine on our own. We lasted for an entire year. It's an important demarcation point, especially when you chase out, all the ruling authority successfully. Did you have a bet? Go ahead.
Yeah, they have this, really, at this point, too, it is a false sense of almost superiority to the British, because they seem to be just whooping their ass. Even when we lose, they lose more men. And they have a finite amount of men and, travel time, where we're rallying whole groups of men. Now they're not, British troops.
I believe it was Durham, not Northam. We're not talking about the current governors there, Beams. Sorry.
But, the Americans really feel like this is going to be easy.
Well, there's that, and you're right. There is a growing sense of we can do this, which is good, right? And when we get to common sense, we'll explain this a little bit more. But it's something that's coalescing in the minds, all right, of all the colonies, of all the 13 colonies, that they can do this, that they can be successful. You have the Battle of Cane Break, or the Break of Canes, which is what I was showing you earlier. Here, okay. You can see that the Loyalists lost, 130 captured, 6 killed, an unknown number were wounded. The Patriots had 1 wounded. Right now, these are the Loyalist commanders. They're expecting to just engage this very quickly and walk all over things, and of course, it doesn't turn out that way. Right now, these are the names of the people that that claim to be descendants of the winning side. Lots of captains here. If you notice in a regiment, captain, because these are all just militias as they go through.
Oh, okay. I was like, is there really that many captains?
Well, technically, you have. It depends upon what you consider the size of a regiment, okay? And it depends on what you consider the size of a company, right? Now, in the U.S. military, as we standardize things nowadays, right, a company is just think of it as 100 men. It's a little bit more than that, but just think of it as 100 men, right? And in those 100 men, what you have them arranged in is between 3 and 4 platoons, depending upon how you want to look at it. Okay, so you'd have 3 captains. There's a captain in charge of each one of those companies. All right, and then you would end up with however many companies make up a battalion, and then a battalion makes up a regiment or a brigade, depending on how you want to go forward with it. Right, but those things were kind of, back then, if you had money and you raised men, well, guess what? you were a captain, or you were you got a commission of some sort from the militia, right? And it didn't need to necessarily be approved by Congress. As these things go on, commissions in the regular army become different than the commissions in the militia.
Well, how did they do the regular army then? Because I know in the Civil War, a state could give a commission to that state's regiment or what have you. Is how it was in the colonial days?
To a large extent, yes. All right. Although they were not necessarily, whether they were accepted as that rank in the regular army depended upon the regular army accepting them in to begin with. Okay.
Okay, all right. And we don't have to get muddled down with rank. It's okay.
A lot of that, it's important because a lot of that happened in the Civil War. A lot of that happened because they had to, both sides had to plus up their forces quite rapidly. Okay. If you didn't have, now the first thing is they looked to see if you had any kind of formal training. If you had West Point training, all right, you would immediately, obviously, get what you needed to. But how are they going to differentiate the people who had West Point training versus the people that didn't? Right? Not everybody had West Point training. Right? Did they have some other service, like some? Oh, kind of like sometimes you have a suit of armor and a sword, like you were in Knight. In a way, yeah.
Yeah, he's, we might laugh at memes there, but he's actually hit the nail on the head.
He has, and so it depended on whether or not somebody could raise forces. Well, who could raise forces? Rich people, right? Now, granted, there were times when people who were well known, who could talk well and get people to rally around them, they would be recognized as a captain or as a commander.
Yeah, and you got to appreciate people like Jefferson, because I don't see Jefferson ever standing there and shooting at people. And he knew it. He was like, "No, I'm not doing that."
There's other things that they had to do, and so they had to make choices. That this is something else that was very true. Right? Many of the people weren't like George Washington, but some of them were. Many of them did say, look, if you would go into war, all right, especially after the Declaration of Independence, many of them said, okay, then I will leave Congress, okay, and I will join the U.S. forces, right? So that did happen in several instances. Now, some of the people were well beyond, and many of the people attending Congress were elderly, right? They're not people that are young, spry, 18-year-olds ready to go fight.
Yeah, who was quite young. I believe Jefferson was in his 30s.
Well, Hamilton was initially in 1775. Hamilton was what, 16, 17 years old?
Yeah, I was going to say Hamilton was young, and he actually did serve. He was the aide-de-camp for Washington, right?
He became Washington's aide, yes.
And who else was young? Henry Lee, I believe, fought.
Yeah. So did somebody who becomes president later on, Andrew Jackson.
And then I never remember his name because
Andrew Jackson was like 13. Anyway, go on. I'm sorry.
Oh no, my daughter started screaming. I had to mute real quick anyway. No, I never remember his name, but that jackass that was sent from South Carolina and drug his feet the whole damn time.
That was Lee. You're talking about Lee, or are you talking about Gates?
No, they show him in the miniseries John Adams. I know it's dramatized, but they did use actual people that were in Congress or whatever. He was at the Second Continental Congress. He was a representative from South Carolina. He voted no for independence until the final day.
Yeah, I don't remember who it is off the top of my head.
Probably because he was such a jackass.
Possibly. All right. You end up with the now the Battle of Canebrake is technically a Patriot victory, but it leads to the Snow Campaign. Now, the Snow Campaign is they won the battle, but then it began snowing, and as a result, the Patriots who were out in the snow decided to say, you know what, I'm freezing to death, I'm getting frostbite, I'm leaving, and they basically leave the field.
And they were still militia at that point, therefore they could just go home, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's basically what happens. But what it did allow, of course, is it allowed for the Loyalists to come back into South Carolina. It does open the way for the Loyalists to come back in. Now, you end up with the Battle of Quebec. And you had right here, we have the invasion of Canada. Now, this is the brainchild of several people, all right, including Daniel Morgan, right, and Arnold, Benedict Arnold. Okay, they get the idea that, okay, we've got Montreal now. If we can do a pincer movement, we can trap Carleton in Quebec, right? The problem is that Arnold and Daniel Morgan, all right, who is basically a militia leader, all right, and has brought in people, I think, from the backwoods folks of Vermont and so forth. And Morgan was another hard fighting, backwoodsman kind of guy, right? Didn't get along to the point where they hated each other's guts, all right? And they wouldn't coordinate, and they would not work together, right? Arnold, of course, is saying, look, I'm by rank, I'm the one in charge. And from that standpoint, Arnold is correct. But Morgan wants none of it. Morgan is like, no, you're not going to tell me or my boys what to do. All right? We don't recognize your authority over us. This is already then a recipe for disaster, right? The idea behind this entire campaign was to get the French, who are supposed to hate the British, to help the Americans, hate the British, to overthrow them, right? The French that were settled in this area from just the French and Indian War. It's an absolute failure. Morgan and his 400 troops are captured, right? Arnold is forced to retreat. Now, Arnold does good service, right? He does do his due diligence. He is up front in front of his men, and he is injured, all right? And as a result, the reports that come back, all right, to the colonies, all right, are written by people who are not supporters of Benedict Arnold, and once again, he is slighted. Not only was he slighted from the command perspective, he was slighted into, well, what he did really didn't amount to much. He may have got injured, but that's because he didn't know what he was doing, right? So this is a second slight handed to Benedict Arnold. And Benedict Arnold got injured early on and led his troops capable. But this is a huge, if you want to look at it, victory, all right, for the British forces, because it basically ends any idea of getting the French Canadians to actually also revolt at the same time.
Why did they think it was a good idea to invade Canada anyway? We had the lumber resources, we had the fur trade in the colonies that we already had. Other than kicking the British off of North America entirely, there was really no reason. It was mainly tribal lands.
Yeah, that's true, but at the same time, it is to kick the British completely off the North American continent.
So it was purely strategic.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course they would they want to take over this area too. There's like, okay, one big, colonial fight. If the British can't land anywhere, they can't stage anywhere, it gives them a great advantage. All right, if the British can stage, if they got a primary place that they can stage in, it's a great advantage for the British. Because you got to remember, logistically, you can build logistics. This is important, all right? Everybody knows that all the infrastructure, what they need to fight this war, the British need to bring from, across the Atlantic. Well, that's all well and good, bringing it here, all right? But you can't. They don't have enough fleet power to bring it all over in one fell swoop. All right, they would have to sacrifice, these ships from somewhere else in order to do that, and they're not going to do that. But what you can do is you can build up. They do have enough forces to continually send supplies over until you got enough forces and enough logistics, all right, enough powder and everything else to begin a march. The British do have that capability to create those kind of logistical points and then begin to move. Well, if you can deny them that, that's a great benefit for you, all right? It keeps them off the territory.
I would agree completely, but hindsight is 2020, and they invade through New York.
Well,
so
hindsight's 2020, but that's because they failed. All right, suppose they'd have been victorious.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying, though, is they didn't use their Canadian ports to invade where it would have been easy to unload and do a land campaign. They went like the Death Star. And
no, they did a number of marches. They did a number of marches, including down here where Carleton comes down and wins this battle at Valcour Island. So, no, they did do a lot of pushing back through here. This is all New York as well. Remember this. When they talk about going through New York, they're talking about this area here, and they're talking about keeping this area here open so that they can navigate shipping through here.
Okay, it's just I remember clearly the large invasion force unloads in New York and kicks Washington's ass all the way out.
Well, before they do that, they're at Boston initially. Okay, so so they had a choice to go back and they leave. They end up leaving Boston. All right. So let's talk about common sense now.
Yeah. Before we get started, that quote that I thought was really good, I just want to state that at the beginning, and then we'll go into the reasoning of why he wrote this book, because it comes on the heels of a visit to the outskirts of Boston and seeing the American troops. So, society in every state is a blessing, but government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil. In its worst state, an intolerable one. And I think that's a pretty good theme for his entire book. Other than the fact where he actually breaks down what we would need to do to create a navy, which is really tedious to read, but I'm a nerd, so I fucking read it.
Well,
and if we would have listened to him, we would have had a fighting navy.
Okay, but you still got to the thing. Okay, yeah, yes and no. Right? There's a problem with the way Payne is thinking. Okay. And that is fire. Okay? It's very easy to torch a shipyard at this time because everything's made of wood. Okay? And the other problem is the sail. Okay? Sail takes heavy cloth and canvas, right? Where are you gonna produce the canvas to run on these ships? Okay, now granted, there's plenty around in other ships. You could rape other ships to do it to an extent, but you end up with a problem with that. The idea that you could
the plantations in Virginia and the Carolinas and stuff, they were growing hemp, a portion of each field usually, and hemp you could produce your rope, you could produce sails from it, and clothing and other useful material.
Well, not really clothing so much, to an extent, but you guarantee you don't want to be wearing that kind of stuff. All right, to sail it's fine, but it's not nearly as strong. Right, and it rips very easily. All right, when you have hemp sails, that's why cotton sails were so treasured. Right, cotton canvas was because of its strength. And
okay, but hemp production to help shore that up in the short term, though.
Well,
right?
It could, but once again, all of that's flammable. Okay, now why is that important? Because it doesn't take much to burn it to the ground. You can create these facilities. If you're building a ship, it doesn't take much to set it on fire, especially in the building process, all right, to let it burn to the ground. So the idea that you can put huge shipyards, all right, in the colonies at this point, if they try to create a shipyard to create that kind of navy, the British would have just sailed in and freaking lit it on fire. They could have just stood offshore and bombarded it until it caught fire.
Yeah, and the fact is, honestly, we didn't have the Mississippi at that time, so we couldn't ship that up and down that. And to produce the hemp inland where it's not at threat and then move it to a shipyard would be a lot of logistics that we just didn't have.
Yeah, Dash is exactly right. We no heavy industry and there's no manufacturing. We just didn't have the materials to do it. Okay, you just don't have the materials to create the kind of Navy in order to do that. And we really don't start building a Navy. We kind of start to build one right before the War of 1812. Right. We start actually getting a little more serious about building a Navy. And even then, it's really not. I mean, because as soon as the War of 1812 is over, we basically ditched the Navy, just like we did the Army.
Which is odd. The Constitution grants for one standing military, really, and it's the Navy.
No. The Congress can. The senior service is the U.S. Army. Senior service was created before the Navy was.
Yeah. I think we discussed this last week, so yeah, whatever. I just know the Constitution grants for a Navy at all times to protect shipping and industry. So
the Constitution does, yes. The Constitution does, yes.
Well, I know you brought up the War of 1812. That's why I was like, well, that's weird because you would think we would keep a Navy at least, even if we scaled everything else down. Well, that's what I was trying to say.
Well, we do have a couple of ships that we always keep, but nothing serious. All right, that's the thing. No, and another thing that's happening that people forget about is during this time frame, during the 1800s to the 1900s, the technology for ships was changing rapidly. All right, the ships. If you take a look at the warships of 1820, right, versus the warships of 1840, versus the warships of 1860, they're not even close to each other. And you can see rapid changing in designs, rapid understandings of how these things are changing. Okay, the idea is that you can create a Navy and keep it around for a long period of time with the same number of ships and keep them updated becomes problematic. And the cost of building a warship, a ship that's just a warship that's just going to sit in harbor unless there's a war when there is no war on. Who wants to spend money on a warship that when you're not at war?
See, I would have. Never mind. I just want to be a pirate.
You just want to go. Oh, John Lafayette. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I just think it'd be fun to have a few warships. We could send them to the Caribbean, go play pirate, and then come back.
Or John Lafitte, whatever. Anyway, all right. So, but Thomas Paine, when you wrote this, back to Common Sense, the booklet was a hit in the American colonies, all right? And it was published up and down the colonies. People were reading it. It was a masterstroke.
Yeah, this wasn't even like a New York Times best-selling book. This was like viral. Everybody read it. And if one person couldn't read, someone else would read it to them, Right.
And this was being read throughout the colonies. People were, engaged in having reading sessions of this book. Okay. This was really, it really caught the imagination of people.
But we said we were going to discuss this a little bit more. So we're on to Thomas Paine himself now. My understanding is he was a recent immigrant to the colonies. you had said, and I believe we were off air when we were discussing this, but you had said yes and no. What did you mean by that?
Well, when we talk about the colonies, we tend to refer to the 13 colonies. But he was born, if I'm not mistaken, in the Caribbean. He is a colonist. They are the colonies. They were as much of the colonies as the Boston, Massachusetts Bay Colony or the Virginia colonies, right? They're as much a colonial as the actual 13 colonists are, right? And this is something that misunderstood. Yeah, when the war is over, they established the 13 colonies, and many of the people from the other colonies that the British have, such as those that were in Britain, or I mean not Britain, but in Canada rather, right? What becomes Canada. There are plenty of people that were quote unquote colonists, right, that joined the colonials that came down, even though those remain British colonies. You see what I'm saying? So Thomas Paine is a colonist, right? He's not from England, if I'm not mistaken. I don't believe he's from England.
Yeah, and he is one of the few founding fathers with no statues. We really remember him through his writing, his work. And a lot of people say that's because he was too revolutionary. He was too radical. Is that true in your estimation?
I think it has less to do with that than the fact that while the book Common Sense plays a major role, it's not like he was a dignitary. You understand what I'm saying? It's not like he was a congressional member who was on a congressional committee. It's not that he was at the forefront. He wrote a pamphlet, right? The pamphlet Common Sense wouldn't even get him. I mean, what are you going to hang him for? Right? For example, if he was captured.
You can hang him for quotes like this. Why is it that we hesitate? From Britain, we can expect nothing but ruin. If she is admitted to the government of America again, this continent will not be worth living in. As far as the crown is concerned, that is treason, sir.
Yeah, but it can be ignored. It can be ignored, right? It's not treason. It's not the same kind of treason as holding a gun and shooting at people. It's not as much it's not actionable treason in that regard, right? You can say this treason because it's inflammatory and they could put him in jail, but would they execute him as a traitor for it? No.
In modern day, would they consider it a incitement to violence?
Yes.
That's not quite treason, even in the modern standard, but that is still dangerous.
It's dangerous. I'm not saying that they wouldn't arrest the guy, all right? But they wouldn't hang it. But that's a far cry from sitting there going, "We're going to execute you summarily in a military tribunal," which is what they would do for treason.
Yeah, and he was at the camp when Washington had first gotten there, really, or a little bit after. And he showed up there to kind of report on it. He wanted to be really our first wartime correspondent, right?
Well, I take that back. Thomas Paine was actually he did emigrate. You are correct. He did come from England.
Oh no, yeah, yep. But he was kind of a war correspondent. But then people started to leave. They started to desert. And he felt the need to write this book. Do you think this pamphlet, because it's really short. I think I could read it in an hour. I mean,
this was the first thing. His other work, actually, that we'll talk about when the time comes out there, with the Sunshine Patriot, actually has more of a direct effect. all right, on the war itself. Now, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna agree with you. It's just he hasn't written that yet. So,
right. Well, correct. You're right. He hasn't written it yet. All right. But it is one of the things that is coming. All right. You end up then after this, you end up with a couple more things that I want to talk about. All right, and that is you end up with the Battle of Moores Creek, right, which is another skirmish. But it shows you now why are these things important. Okay, one of the things I want to point out is during the first part of this campaign this is the setup between the loyalists, all right, and the patriots in the South. You're seeing constant skirmishing beginning, all right, where people are taking this to each other. There's not really forces. They're not really, standard British forces in the South yet, right? They haven't been. They haven't really deployed them, right? It's mainly becoming more and more contentious, okay, between families on one side and families on the other. So it's going to turn into...
Yeah, the main British fleet hasn't even arrived at New York Harbor. So
no.
The war really hasn't even started yet.
Right. You have the Continental Navy captures the province, the new province islands in the Bahamas. They capture a small island. This is done via, for all intents and purposes, piracy. These are letters of marque saying, go ahead and you can attack. All right. But it's a victory. It's announced. All right. That these are colonial. And so everyone's, huzzah, huzzah, look at our great forces. And then you have the British, all right, evacuating Boston. Okay. Now, the British were under siege. The colonials have surrounded Boston for all intents and purposes. They're maintaining their forces. Washington has arrived. He is when he gets there, he is in absolute despair because he doesn't see an army. He sees a bunch of ragtag militia people.
Yeah, it was actually pretty bad. Half of them were drunk. They didn't dig any latrines. I mean,
yeah, and that's where this is something that basically George Washington has to create. He actually has to create on his own manuals for sanitation, manuals for dress. All right, proper, to try and bring this into a proper force. Okay, now. For some people, they take to it. Some troops take to it. Most troops don't. All right. Many of them still maintain theirs. He also has to recreate everything from scratch. This is not an army. All right. This is a bunch of militia. This is a bunch of people that have gathered together in a mob. All right, to fight off the British. Okay.
Yeah, and before you move on too much, funny story. George Washington actually had to kick the camp followers, which was the polite term for whore. He had to kick them to the outskirts of the camp. And then he said, hey, if you catch VD, sure, you'll get your shots. I can't have all of you fucking dying from venereal diseases. But non-coms will pay $5 or something like that. And then commissioned officers had to pay like $20 out of their own pocket to get cured from the clap. I mean, could you imagine that day at the army camp? You got George Washington all proper.
Yeah, he is single-handedly being forced to do this. Now, there are people who are trying to give him some help, and one of these people is a man named Henry Knox. And Henry Knox comes up with the idea, okay, if we're going to actually beat the British here, we need heavy cannon. The small little round cannon shit ain't going to come. We need heavy cannon. Well, where's there's heavy cannon? Well, there's heavy cannon at Fort Ticonderoga. He comes out and says, I can bring it from Fort Ticonderoga all the way here. Everyone else tells him you're full of shit. That's 300 miles away, through woods. You have to sail it down the rivers. Those rivers are going to freeze soon. You can't do it. Henry Knox says, I can do it. And on December 1st, Washington agrees, and Henry Knox leaves with a small contingent to go and get these cannons to try and bring them, all right, to Boston. 4 days later, now I want you to think of this. This is not insignificant. All right, Fort Ticonderoga is 300 miles away. He arrives 4 days later. Right? He was booking. Right? He did not waste time. His men dismantle the cannons. All right, load them on sleds, and then, all right, start to ferry them down initially along the lake before he can get to the overland area. He barely makes it, all right, on the lake before the lakes begin to freeze. All right, so that portion he succeeds at, and then he has to wait, and he has to wait. And he had to wait all the way until Christmas before a heavy snow came in so he could use the sleds, right? And then he begins to move these ton cannons on sleds all the way, all right, to Boston. Now, during this, a couple of the cannons actually fall into the river, all right, because the ice wasn't thick enough. They actually, with the help of people from Albany, bring them out, all right, so that he can arrive. And he presents in early March or February, these cannons, all right, all of them without losing a single cannon, all right, to Washington.
Yeah, and I didn't buy it when I saw it in the John Adams miniseries of Knox bringing the cannon right past the Adams farm. But if you look at it, he probably did. I mean, and there was probably a good chance that Abigail Adams really did give them water and some food as they passed by. I mean, we don't know for sure, but on the map, he went right past her house.
And this is a nasty winter. Okay, these guys are cold, all right, but they're committed, right? And Knox keeps them moving, all right. And the other thing you got to remember about the military travels on its stomach. Knox is keeping his men fed during this entire trip, right? He does a hell of a masterful job of doing this, right?
Do you think he carried a majority of the provisions with him, or do you think people like Abigail Adams and the other patriots helped along the way?
Oh, I think that they helped along the way, but the thing is the idea of being able to create the foraging parties to be able to constantly keep these men fed is not insignificant. All right, it's the creation. It's the start of the creation of the logistics that are gonna plague Washington his entire time. But at least he starts to create a core behind it. An idea of what we can do from a logistical standpoint. Now, Knox himself doesn't like logistics. He sees himself as a man of action, as a rotund man of action, I might add. but he sees himself as a man of action.
Yeah, but when you're good at something, you're good at something. And he really did take one for the team, if this is who I think it is. Right. He's the one that Washington puts in charge of logistics from then on. And he really didn't want to do that at all. No. Right?
No, he expected to be in charge of the artillery. I mean, God, he's the one who brought it in. I mean, he wanted to be in charge of the artillery, but he does later on do that. Now, what Washington does, and this is quite clever, is he actually he orders a bombardment of Boston, right, to cover what he's doing at night. And what he does is he sends these men in this new cannon that he's got up to Dorchester Heights. Now, why is Dorchester Heights important? Because ferrying the guns to Dorchester Heights not only gives him full range of the entire Boston, the entire city of Boston, but it also gives him control of the harbor. All right. And when they see those big guns on those heights, where they basically are safe from artillery and cannons from the fleet, but the fleet can get rained on with steel, the British understand, all right, the jig's up, we got to go. we can't maintain this, because now the siege is complete. Now you've totally surrounded them. You can't keep ferrying supplies in via the Navy, because they now have the means of cutting off any kind of food coming in from the ocean.
Yeah, I want it specified though. Okay, so if they were trying to bring supplies or men or food, whatever, in, the cannons on the heights could reach them at a certain distance. But that being said, it could not reach the fleet. And the fleet's cannon couldn't raise high enough to reach the heights.
Yes and no. It could reach the fleet if the fleet came in far enough.
Well, duh.
All right. But you needed to come in far enough to land supplies.
Yeah, and how many?
I mean, they could stay out far enough so that they couldn't get hit. Sure, I mean that's true.
Which they do, and I believe, I forget his name, but the British general in charge, Hal. I believe he waited a few days before surrendering and asking for permission to leave. Right? He tried to hold out for a few days. Or did he surrender immediately?
I don't think he actually surrendered. They just agreed to leave, and they just load up and leave.
And what happens to we're hitting the hour mark, so perfect timing. Do we know? Because I personally don't. What happens to this fleet when they leave? They don't go back to England, do they?
Initially, if I'm not mistaken, they go back up to Quebec.
Okay, because I was wondering if they just disappeared off the coast for a while, waited to get word that...
if I'm not mistaken, they go up to Quebec, I believe it's Quebec, or they go down. They either go down south or go to Quebec. They don't leave the continent, right? The troops don't actually fully leave the continent, right? They do leave it because Howe is planning the next step, which is because he knows reinforcements are coming. All right, major reinforcements, and his plan is, okay, we're gonna land and take New York. That's his plan.
And this is a good spot to kind of end the timeline. I think it gives us a great spot to start next week. Anything else you want to say about Paine? Or do you want to cover him more in depth when he writes the second book?
I think that talking about the American crisis is probably which is his second little thing, is going to be more important.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good to me. So you got your morning news show. You're going to talk about the upcoming RNC convention, or what?
I don't know if I'm going to mention that. There's plenty of other things to complain about as far as the news goes. But that's just tomorrow morning. My normal shows, I do a morning show at 6 a.m. Pacific. Unfortunately, I will be doing it Monday, but I won't be doing it Tuesday. But then I'll start up again on Wednesday.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming out and watching us discuss the American Revolution. We'll be back next week with episode 6. And the war is going to kick off soon, but I believe the Declaration of Independence is coming pretty quick.
Yes. Well, obviously, this is the start of 1776, and there was a couple things that are going to happen. A few battles, basically several attacks from the Native Americans that are being stirred up by the British. You have the Declaration, right? And then you have the occupation of New York by the British. The British settled in.
Yeah, I want to add, anybody that has watched this or watches this in the future before we do our next episode, write in the comments. Do you want us to actually do a whole episode breaking down the Declaration of Independence? Or do you want us to just highlight it a little bit and stick with our main format? Because I kind of want to do an analysis of the Declaration.
So the Declaration is more or less a single page. So yeah, I mean, we could go over the whole thing. That probably wouldn't be bad.
All right. Good night, everybody. We're out of here. And that's about it.